This is Simon Peter. And this is Jesus. They met for the very first time on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. "Follow me," Jesus said, and that is exactly what Simon Peter did. He left his boat, his net, and his huge catch of fish on the seashore in Galilee, and he, along with his brother Andrew, followed Jesus for 3 years. And in those 3 years, Peter saw and heard some pretty amazing things. One day, as Jesus traveled with Peter and the other disciples, he turned to them and said, "Who do you say I am?" Peter thought of all he had heard Jesus say and all he had seen him do, and Peter said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." "Exactly," Jesus said, and from that time on, he began explaining what it meant that he was the Messiah. He told them he must go to Jerusalem. There he would suffer and be killed, but that on the 3rd day he would rise to life again. Now the disciples didn't really understand what that meant, but they continued to follow him all the way to Jerusalem. The people in Jerusalem were excited to see Jesus and cheered him on as he entered Jerusalem. But the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders, they didn't like what they had seen Jesus do, and they definitely didn't like what they heard Jesus say. They thought Jesus was lying when he said he was the Messiah, God's Son. And so they planned to get rid of him, and they waited for just the right moment to do so. A few days later, Jesus gathered his disciples in the upper room to celebrate the Passover meal. Can you remember something that happened during that meal? They ate. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Judas left to betray Jesus to the Jewish leaders, and they shared bread and wine. Sometime during that night, Jesus said to his disciples, "This very night you will all turn away because of me." Peter replied, "All the others may turn away, but I never will." "Oh, Peter," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." But Peter said, "I will never say I don't know you." Later that night, Jesus took them to a garden so he could pray. When Jesus finished praying, soldiers came to arrest him. And they took him to the house of the high priest where the Jewish leaders had gathered. All the disciples scattered in fear. But Peter followed Jesus. He got as far as the courtyard. Then he sat down with the guards and waited to see what would happen. Inside, Jesus was on trial before the Jewish leaders. Finally, the high priest got up and yelled, "Tell us the truth," he said. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" "Yes, I am, and you know that I am," Jesus replied. "You sit in judgment over me today, but one day I will sit with my Father in heaven and judge you." Then the high priest was really mad and said to the others, "He speaks like he thinks he is God. This is blasphemy. We don't need any more evidence. What shall we do with him?" "He is guilty and he must die," they answered. Meanwhile, Peter was still sitting outside. A servant girl came to him and said, "You were with Jesus of Galilee, weren't you?" she said. But Peter said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then, a little while later, Peter went out to the gate leading into the courtyard. There, another servant saw him. she said to the others, "Hey, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Peter denied knowing Jesus. "I don't know the man." After a while, those standing there went up to Peter. "You must be one of them," they said. "The way you talk gives you away." Then Peter burst out in anger, saying, "I don't know the man." Then right away, a rooster crowed. Peter remembered what Jesus had said. Jesus had told him, "Before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." Peter went outside. He broke down and cried. Later that day, Peter found out what happened. Jesus had been crucified and he had died. Peter was so ashamed of what he had done, so afraid, and so very sad. Peter wasn't even there when they took Jesus' body off the cross and buried it in a tomb. He and the others hid in the upper room, sad and afraid and unsure of what to do next. Then suddenly, on Sunday morning, the women rushed into the room saying, "Jesus is alive! We have seen him, Peter. He has risen from the dead." What? He couldn't believe it. Could it be true? Jesus was dead and buried. Everyone knew that. Their words seemed like nonsense to him. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. He bent over and saw the strips of linen lying by themselves. Then he went away, wondering what had happened. It wasn't until that evening that everyone finally understood. They were in the upper room behind locked doors when suddenly Jesus appeared to all of them, saying, "Peace be with you." And he showed them his hands and feet. The disciples rejoiced. Jesus was alive. After this, Simon Peter and some of the others went home to Galilee, wondering what was next for them. Then he had an idea. He called some of the other disciples and said, "Let's go fishing." They agreed. Together they fished all night, but they caught nothing. Then just as the sun was coming up, they looked up and saw a man on the seashore. They didn't know who it was. I wonder if you know who it was. That's right, it was Jesus. And Jesus called out to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" "No," they said, "not even one." Jesus said, "Cast your net out on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast out their nets as he said, and when the nets hit the water, something amazing happened. They filled with more and more and more fish, so much so that they were not even able to haul the nets in. John then leaned over to Peter and said, "It is the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard this, he threw himself into the sea, heading straight for Jesus. The other disciples brought the boat in, dragging the net full of fish. When they got out onto land, they saw a charcoal fire laid out, and Jesus had fish and bread cooking over it. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast with me." When they had finished breakfast, Jesus pulled Peter to one side and said, "Peter, do you love me more than these other disciples?" Peter replied, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Then Jesus said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." Then Jesus said to him for the third time, "Do you love me?" And Peter replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." They sat for a while on the beach talking, and Peter had lots of other questions. But in the end, Jesus said to him, "Peter, you just need to follow me and everything will be okay," Jesus said. And that is exactly what Peter did for the rest of his life.